I'm Dan Drake. This is Front Up on Geno TV and Channel 99. Today, our guest is the town's transportation planner, Mike Burns. Mike, welcome back. Nice to see you.
Nice to meet you as well.
I thought at this point in the summer when things are starting to get congested and so forth, it'd be a good time to talk about what's in the cards.
Yeah, you can definitely feel it this time of year, can't you?
You can,
Yeah.
definitely. And I mean, obviously there's some short-term things, and we've got some visuals to talk about a couple of those. But at the end, I'd also like to talk about sort of what conceptually is in the. Are there other projects in the
In our master plan and things.
and in your head and so forth?
Sure.
But before we get on to traffic, vehicular traffic or car traffic, let's talk about bike paths for a minute.
Okay.
I mean, we're still waiting, I guess, for the approvals for the in-town bike path, the one that's going to run across from basically Washington Street Extension to Orange Street.
Yeah, well, there's the in-town bike path concept, and the idea of that is basically linking bicyclists from the downtown area to the Milestone Rotary and using some kind of connection. That's pieced out into different phases, and we have a phase one that's going across the railroad causeway from Washington Street
Right.
Extension to Orange Street. That's the first phase of it. And that's already been approved, and right now it's being bid for construction.
It is. Okay.
And
So it'll happen this fall or this winter.
Exactly. That process ends in early August, and then the contract will be selected, and they'll come up with a construction plan. And then we can give everybody a final schedule of activities that we can anticipate. When should we have the dedication, stuff like that.
How long do you estimate the construction will take?
Well, if we go by Mass DOT's standards, I'm assuming it's some unacceptable long-range project that'll take 2 or 3 years to construct. Realistically, it should take about a year, perhaps a year and a half. But within a window of a year, I would imagine would be
Why so
something to
long?
expect.
I mean, seriously, it's not that long a distance. It's a few hundred feet.
Yeah. Well, it would be constructed over the winter, and you try to anticipate some days that are
Right.
just not very good for
Right.
construction. And there's some paving that may have to wait
Wait
until the
until
weather warms up so you can actually do that paving work. And then if we come up against the summer again, if that happens, you can't really pave in the summer and close down Orange Street
Right.
for Daffodil or Memorial Weekend or anything like this. So perhaps there'll be it'll be effectively usable, the area, but it won't be final until, say, the following fall. So it could last a year, a little bit beyond, but that's the general expectation.
Does phase one include any improvements on Orange Street itself?
Yes, Orange Street will be widened out about 8 feet so that 2 4-foot bike lanes can be installed along a section of Orange Street. Essentially, it'll be a 4-foot lane on the side of traffic, a shoulder, essentially, that'll be dedicated just for bicyclists. And
So
then
that explains why it would take so long, if that's part of phase one.
exactly, you have to rebuild that section of Orange Street. And
From the intersection with the bike path where it comes across the marsh to
Goose
the-
Pond Lane to Spruce Street, which is right around where the Hatches and Marine Home Center property starts. So just within that section.
Okay. Phase two will take it all the way to the Rotary?
Correct. There's a phase along Washington Street and a phase along the balance of Orange Street. So yeah, those future phases will, the funding for those designs was approved this past town meeting, so that work will start very soon.
What about the rest of the bike path system? Is it pretty well complete now?
Getting there. I think there's 10 miles of planned bike paths. Tom Nevers, Walwinet Road. There's the extension of the Hummock Pond Road bike path along Milk Street, which is something that will happen this fall. So there's still some other projects that could be completed, and they're still in our plans. Obviously, this in-town bike path is the top priority, and we're going to focus on that, as well as the extension of the Hummock Pond Road path. These Tom Nevers and Walwinet, and some of the other roads that we can justify bike paths on. Boulevard being another. Those will happen in the future, and we've planned those out over our 25-year plan of when those will be implemented. But it's in that 25-year window those projects will be realized.
Okay. All right, let's move on to car traffic.
Okay.
What are the top priorities from the transportation planning perspective?
As far as improvements and
Improvements
intersections.
and traffic flow.
Okay. Well, again, this past town meeting, we had a lot of projects that were approved by town meeting. So it's obviously the town and the community is very serious about getting these projects implemented. The Surfside Road, Bartlett Road intersection, there have been previous town meetings that have approved land acquisitions and fundings to start to implement a roundabout at that intersection. The design funding for a roundabout was approved this past town meeting. So that will be the next intersection priority. Of course, there's other intersections that are in our plan, our long-range plan. Next year, we'll ask for funding for the Fairgrounds Road, Old South Road intersection, and then obviously the intersection by the high school and the hospital is still on the something that we have identified as a need. So that'll be implemented at some point in the future as well. But the Four
why-
Corners intersection, Fairgrounds Old South Road, and the Bartlett Surfside intersection are really the three choke points that need to be addressed.
This is the Four Corners, as you call it, right?
Correct. The Four Corners, because it's the intersection of four different streets: Prospect, Atlantic, Sparks Avenue, and Surfside Road.
Why don't you point out which is which on this? Just,
Surfside Road, obviously here with the high school to the right. Sparks Avenue here with the Boys and Girls Club to the north of that. Atlantic Avenue, which leads into town, and Prospect Street, which the hospital is in a butter up to the south.
Before I show you the next one, there are three plans, right?
There's a preferred alternative.
Okay.
But you try to do due diligence and understanding every possible alternative to address safety and congestion.
Okay.
So we try to find the best proposal for that.
Is this the preferred?
That was the initial preferred. There's some refinements to that, but essentially this is the roundabout that's identical to the one at Sparks Avenue. Everybody's very familiar with that, and it's not some kind of mega rotary, but this circle here is very similar to the size that it's at Sparks Avenue. This shows a turn lane from Surfside Road to Sparks Avenue. Whether that's actually a component of the final plan, that's something still under discussion. So that may or may not be part of the eventual reconstruction.
What would be the reason not to do it? Because the schools don't want it, or because that was one of the reasons the plan sort of hit a shoal before, right?
Yeah, the impact of the school property was definitely a concern. There's some utilities at the corner there that are also of concern. But is it really necessary to have that turning lane in the first place? Can the roundabout itself address that the congestion there? We think that it can. It can probably be done without that turn lane. Obviously, if there's some need for it, it just makes it easier to flow through. Turning movements are a lot easier. It's a sharp turn. But that's something that's still under discussion. But we have two alternatives with and without a turn lane there. But that's generally the idea to address congestion. Traffic backs up the first way along Surfside Road.
Right.
It backs up past the Boys and Girls Club along Sparks
Is this
Avenue.
going to make a substantial difference?
The roundabout, yes. There's an idea to just realign the roads and create a four-way stop.
That's this one, right?
Correct. There wasn't a lot of what we call bang for the buck. There's some alleviation of congestion, reduced queues. The queues wouldn't be backed up as far, but it's really not significant at all. So the roundabout, keeps the traffic moving without making everyone come to a complete stop. We would also argue that there's more air quality improvement benefits to a roundabout because cars aren't stopped and idling, not moving anywhere. So there's air quality improvements with a roundabout versus a four-way stop. For all those reasons, safety, congestion, air quality, the roundabout is the better solution.
I got a question for Dan to ask you. What about if things are moving so quickly? What about the safety of the children? With the speed at which those cars.
Yeah, well, let's talk about that when we get through. We'll
All
do
right,
the other
all
one,
right, all right.
but it's a good question. Then there is another plan, which is this one. And how's that different from the first roundabout?
Well, I think that's...
Or is that what I showed
yeah,
first? I'm
that's what you
sorry.
showed you. There is a larger roundabout that's a little bit bigger. I guess the circle itself, the lanes inside the roundabout can, accept more vehicles. That has much more property impact. There is, you could argue there's some degree of improvement to congestion above what the smaller roundabout would do. Obviously, it wasn't that significant. And because of the property impacts, there's more properties that are being impacted, and the square footage of those properties is increased. So you try to look at the spectrum of improvement. Obviously, this is one end of the spectrum. The other end is doing nothing.
Right.
And we try to find a good, acceptable middle ground that again, the circle itself is much bigger than the first roundabout option. Again, it doesn't have that significant of an improvement to congestion with a larger size. So the increase in property impacts, along the sides here, the number of properties being impacted increases, the square footage of the properties impacted increases versus the first roundabout alternative. So for all those reasons, and obviously it's more material using, so it'll be
Right.
much more expensive intersection
Okay.
to construct.
All right, let's go back to this one, the preferred one. What is being done to enhance the safety of pedestrians with this plan, particularly of the school children?
The roundabout is considered a safer intersection treatment than a four-way stop, or in some other areas they have signalized intersections. This is the safest alternative. There's some discussion when we propose these ideas and have our hearings that the traffic moves much more quickly through a roundabout, and it's just not the case. At 5 or 10 miles an hour, a vehicle has better reaction time. If there happens to be some incident where a pedestrian gets struck by a vehicle, getting struck at 5 or 10 miles an hour is there's less damage than say 20 miles an hour. If we had a four-way intersection and somebody was stopped up at Atlantic Avenue and was progressing down Surfside Road, and there happened to be somebody on Surfside Road crossing, that vehicle coming from Atlantic can build up a much more speed, and it's going faster than 5 or 10 miles an hour at that location. So there's the severity of the injury is going to be increased under that configuration, whereas in a roundabout, slower moving traffic, there's refuge areas for the pedestrians. As they're crossing the road, they cross one lane, can stop, they're not in any type of conflict with vehicles, then they can cross the next lane. It's much more safer. The conditions are safer for a pedestrian under this configuration.
There was something about moving a crosswalk over in front of the entrance of the high school that was on one of these plans.
Yeah.
Is that on here?
Not on here. There's obviously some traffic improvements in the vicinity of the school, that crossings and whatnot. But right for this particular project, this allows crossing at all of the approaches, and right now you just don't have that under the existing condition. It's not as safe under the existing condition.
What's the probable timetable for this?
It's probably in more of a 10-year window than a 25-year window, but it's not one of the projects that's in, say, a 3-year window. That's the way I would kind of frame the priorities. We obviously have the Bartlett Surfside intersection that's funded right now. This Four Corners intersection improvement right now, it's not funded, but it's in a plan and it's in a schedule that's probably within the next 10 years.